Delta outbreak tests New Zealand's zero-COVID strategy, but lockdown has broad support and home British newspapers didn't hold back. The Times called New Zealand a mysterious socialist hermit nation where the public languish in a COVID prison, while the Telegraph slammed a once welcoming country that had turned into an isolated dystopia. New Zealand, by contrast, is one of the few countries still committed to stamping COVID out.Hours after confirming the country's first Delta case in the community. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern ordered the entire nation into lockdown, with the backing of a broad consensus across the political spectrum. 10 days later, the outbreak had spread to 347 cases, with one person in intensive care, as of Friday. But New Zealand's own COVID-19 response minister has indicated the approach might not last forever. The big question for New Zealand will be what its new strategy might look like. No urgency to reconnect until Delta arrived. New Zealand's tough border rules had protected it from the turmoil seen in most other countries. So far, New Zealand has recorded just over 3,000 cases and 26 deaths. But the comparatively low death toll has come at a cost. An estimated 1 million New Zealanders live overseas, with nearly 600,000 in Australia, and many of New Zealand's 5 million residents likely have at least one friend or relative living overseas. Some haven't seen their loved ones in over a year. The fortified borders have also contributed to another major casualty: tourism. Once the country's largest export industry, overseas visitor arrivals slipped by more than 98% in January 2021 compared with a year before. Despite that, New Zealand doesn't seem to be in any rush to reconnect with the world. There's even an us versus them mentality among some social media users who criticize overseas New Zealanders desperate to get home for not returning sooner. That's because many still believe the upsides are worth it. Charlotte Guido, 28, a teacher in the capital Wellington, said going into lockdown was annoying, and it had taken a toll not being able to see her family in France. But she still thought the zero-COVID approach was the right one. This lockdown was really tough, but before that we were just living life like normal, and it was all good. It was really chill, she said. It does seem like the pain of not having the borders open, for what we get in return, for the lifestyle we get in return, is still worth it. Anna Robinson, 32, spent much of the pandemic in Europe before moving back to New Zealand in April. Like Kitu, the strict border rules come at the cost of missing out on loved ones' important moments, such as births and weddings. But she thinks New Zealand's rules mean that vulnerable people or people with underlying health conditions are not being cast aside. Lockdown feels like a very small price to pay for the amount of freedom and safety for the community that will come after, she said. A different approach from Australia. New Zealand doesn't need to look far to know what can happen if Delta takes hold. Under our national plan, when we start hitting the 70% and 80% vaccination targets, we can start claiming back what COVID has been taking away from us. And when we do so, we must not be intimidated by the case numbers that will inevitably increase, Morrison wrote in an op-ed distributed to local media. By then, the contagious variant had taken hold, leaving Australia with little choice but to recalibrate. Now they're struggling to keep it under control. University of New South Wales epidemiologist Professor Mary-Louise McLaws, an expert in infection prevention, said this week, "I can't see them getting back to zero. I think it's too late." Sean Hendy, a COVID-19 modeler at Auckland University, said the country's swift response would likely allow a return to zero COVID cases. Certainly with Delta, the idea that you can ratchet up your response to Delta as the outbreak grows, that just simply hasn't been the case in New South Wales, he said. If you're able to pull it off, was definitely the right approach, said Hendy. I don't think it's inevitable that we'll have a Delta outbreak that gets out of control. Epidemiologist Michael Baker, who advises the government on its COVID strategy, told national broadcaster Radio New Zealand this week that elimination had been the optimal strategy up to now by every indicator we can use. Technically possible, it's being achieved across the region. I'm confident it will be achieved again in New Zealand, he said. When to drop zero COVID, Australian Prime Minister Morrison has criticised the idea of pursuing an elimination strategy forever, calling it absurd. COVID is a new, different world. We need to get out there and live in it. We can't stay in the cave, and we can get out of it safely, he said this week. While New Zealand hasn't gone that far yet, New Zealand's COVID-19 response minister Chris Hipkins said the Delta variant raised questions about the long-term viability of the elimination strategy. It does mean that all of our existing protections start to look less adequate and less robust, he said. As a result of that, we are looking very closely at what more we can do there. But it does raise some very big questions about the long-term future of our plans. After struggling to get supply, New Zealand has one of the lowest COVID-19 vaccination rates in the OECD, with just over 20% of the population fully immunized. We're saying to everybody, get vaccinated, get fully vaccinated. You still have time to make sure that when we start opening up, you have those options to live a more freer life, Berejiklian said. But while Australia has signaled how it could move away from zero COVID in the next few months, there's little clarity about when or if New Zealand will do the same. Earlier this month, a strategic COVID-19 public health advisory group said the elimination strategy could still continue, even after New Zealand reopened its borders. Our elimination strategy has proved its worth and remains an achievable goal even when current border restrictions are eased, the Ministry of Health says on its website. In short, New Zealand is not planning to live with COVID in the same way as other countries.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.